Nobody warns you about the quiet ones. Everyone talks about the dramatic endings, the fights, the betrayal, the moment everything explodes and you finally have a reason to walk away. Nobody tells you about the mornings that look completely normal. The coffee brewing in the kitchen. The man you love humming a song he never fully sings. The ring on your finger catching the light. Nobody warns you that sometimes the thing that breaks you isn't pain. Sometimes it's peace. A peace so complete, so undisturbed, that sitting inside it you suddenly realize it has never once felt like yours. That was my Tuesday morning. I was 31 years old when I realized the life I was living belonged to someone else entirely. Not because someone took it from me. Not because anything terrible had happened. But because one quiet Tuesday morning, sitting on the edge of a bathtub in an apartment I had helped decorate, wearing a robe I had chosen in a life I had carefully built, I looked down at the diamond ring on my finger and felt absolutely nothing. And that nothing was the loudest thing I had ever heard. Derek was in the kitchen. I could hear him from where I sat. The soft shuffle of his slippers on the hardwood floor, the gentle clinking of mugs, the low, comfortable hum of a song he always hummed but never fully sang. It was a Tuesday routine. Coffee at 7. Breakfast at 7:15. A kiss on my forehead before he left for work at 7:40. Derek Calloway was the kind of man who kept to a schedule not because he was rigid, but because he genuinely believed that a good life was built from good habits. He was not wrong about that. He was kind. He was steady. He was the sort of man that other women pointed to when they were trying to explain what they wanted. My mother adored him. My friends called me lucky. And for 4 years I had agreed with all of them. Or at least I had tried very hard to agree with all of them, which I now understand is a completely different thing. I sat there on the edge of that bathtub and I turned the ring around my finger slowly. Once, twice. The diamond caught the bathroom light and threw tiny pieces of brightness against the white tile wall. It was a beautiful ring. He had chosen it carefully. He had taken my best friend with him to the jewelry store because he wanted to get it exactly right. That was the kind of man Derek was. And still I sat there and I thought, when was the last time I felt truly alive in this relationship? I searched for the answer the way you search for your keys when you are already late. Frantically, desperately, turning over every memory I could find. Our first date. Our first trip together. The night he proposed on the rooftop of a restaurant in River North while the Chicago skyline burned orange behind him. I remembered all of it. I could see every moment clearly. But feeling it, really feeling it, the way you feel something in your chest, in the space behind your ribs, I couldn't find it. What I found instead was something smaller and sadder. I found a version of myself who had learned, very quietly and very gradually, to measure love by how safe it felt rather than how alive it made her. I had confused comfort with contentment. I had called stability happiness because I didn't know what else to call it. And I had spent 4 years building a future that looked exactly the way a future was supposed to look, and never once stopped to ask myself if it was mine. The hum from the kitchen continued. And then, sitting there in the quiet, I understood something I had been circling for 4 years without ever landing on it. A life can be good and still not be yours. I slid the ring off my finger. It came off easily. That detail stayed with me for a long time afterward. How easily it came off. As though even the ring understood something I was only just beginning to admit. I held it in my palm and looked at it for a long moment. Then I closed my fingers around it, stood up, walked to the kitchen doorway, and watched Derek pour 2 mugs of coffee with the quiet efficiency of a man who had never once doubted that this was exactly where he was supposed to be. He looked up and smiled when he saw me. That warm, uncomplicated smile that had always made me feel guilty for wanting more. "Morning," he said. "Coffee's ready." "Derek," I said. And something in my voice made him set the mug down. I will not tell you that the conversation was easy. It was not. There were tears, mostly mine, though his eyes were red by the end. There was confusion and then hurt, and then the particular silence that falls between two people when something enormous and irreversible has just been said out loud. He asked me if there was someone else. I told him no. And that was the truth. He asked me what was wrong with us. What had he done? What could he fix? What did I need that he hadn't given me? And that was the hardest part. Because the answer was nothing. He had done nothing wrong. He had given me everything he had. The problem was never Derek. The problem was that I had been so focused on building the life I was supposed to want that I had never stopped to find out what I actually wanted. And by the time I did stop, by the time I finally sat still long enough to hear the truth, it was already 4 years later, and there was a diamond ring on my finger and wedding magazines in the living room. I gave him the ring back before I left. He held it in both hands and stared at it for a long time without speaking. I picked up the bag I had packed while he was in the shower and I walked out of the apartment. The door clicked shut behind me. I stood in the hallway for a moment, breathing. The fluorescent light above me buzzed softly. The carpet in the hallway was beige and slightly worn. Somewhere on another floor a television was playing. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, the life in front of me was completely unknown. I was terrified. I was also, underneath the terror, somewhere I could barely reach yet, relieved. I moved into a studio apartment in Wicker Park 2 weeks later. It was smaller than anything I had lived in since my mid-20s. The radiator knocked in the night. The kitchen window looked out onto a brick wall. My mother called it temporary. My friends called it brave in the careful tone people use when they actually mean reckless. I called it mine. And then I went back to work. Voss Creative occupied the top 3 floors of a glass building on West Monroe Street. And on most mornings it felt less like an office and more like a place where ambitious people came to either prove themselves or quietly dissolve trying. The agency handled branding, content strategy, and creative direction for some of the biggest names in finance, fashion, and tech. It was fast, it was demanding, and it did not particularly care about your personal life. Which, at that particular point in mine, was exactly what I needed. I was a senior content strategist, which meant I sat somewhere in the comfortable middle of the company's food chain, respected enough to lead projects, invisible enough that the executive floor had never needed to learn my name. I had been fine with that arrangement for 3 years. I had been fine with a lot of arrangements that didn't quite fit me. But something had shifted. The morning I walked back into that office after ending my engagement, I felt it immediately. A sharpness, a clarity, as though someone had cleaned a window I hadn't known was dirty. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and I worked. Not the careful, measured work of someone trying not to make mistakes. Real work. Hungry work. The kind that comes from somewhere deeper than professionalism. The Hartley campaign landed on my desk 3 weeks later. Hartley Financial was a mid-sized wealth management firm that had spent the last 2 years quietly bleeding clients and credibility after a series of poor investments and worse press coverage. They had come to Voss Creative as a last resort, and they had made it very clear that they needed a strategy that could rebuild trust, reposition the brand, and make the public believe in them again, without looking like they were trying to make the public believe in them again. Which is, as anyone in this industry will tell you, the hardest kind of work there is. My director assigned it to a team of 4. Within a week, I had taken it over entirely. Not by pushing anyone out, but simply by having more ideas, more energy, and more conviction than anyone else in the room. I worked early mornings and late nights. I filled notebooks with strategy maps and audience personas and messaging frameworks. I interviewed Hartley's remaining clients personally, something no one had asked me to do, because I wanted to understand not just what they thought about the brand but what they felt about it. What I found was this. People didn't just want to trust Hartley financially. They wanted to feel that Hartley understood something about the uncertainty of being human and still choosing to build toward the future anyway. So that became the campaign. Building forward. Not a slogan about money. A story about resilience. About the quiet courage of people who keep going even when the numbers are frightening. We used real clients, with their permission, and real language, not the polished corporate language that brands always default to when they're scared, but actual human words. Actual human faces. The kind of campaign that makes you feel something before you even realize you're being spoken to. It worked. Within 6 weeks of launch, Hartley's client inquiry numbers had increased by 34%. 2 major financial publications ran features on the campaign. The client sent a handwritten note to my director calling it the most honest piece of brand work they had ever seen. I found out about all of this the same way I found out about most things at Voss Creative. Through office conversations, through the particular electricity that moves through an open-plan workspace when something significant has happened. But I didn't find out what it truly meant until the morning my director appeared at my desk with an expression I had never seen on her face before. "Maya," she said. "Natasha wants to see you." The office went very quiet around me. Or perhaps it didn't. Perhaps it was only quiet inside my own body. That sudden stillness that arrives when something important is about to happen and some part of you already knows it. "Natasha Voss?" I said, which was a slightly ridiculous question because there was only one Natasha at Voss Creative. My director raised an eyebrow in a way that communicated several things simultaneously. The executive floor. 11 o'clock. I had never been to the executive floor. In 3 years at the company, I had seen Natasha Voss exactly 4 times. Twice at all staff meetings where she spoke from a stage. Once in an elevator where I had pressed myself against the wall and stared at the floor numbers like my life depended on it. And once through the glass wall of a conference room where she was dismantling someone's presentation with the calm, surgical precision of a person who had long since stopped being impressed by effort alone. She was 43 years old. She had built Voss Creative from a 2-person consultancy operating out of a Logan Square apartment into a $40 million agency with clients on 3 continents. And she had done it in 15 years without a business degree, without family money, and without ever once softening her standards to make other people comfortable. She wore her dark hair pulled back in a way that looked effortless and almost certainly was not. She had the kind of posture that made a room feel smaller simply by her standing in it. She terrified most people at the company. She had never terrified me exactly, but only because she had never noticed me enough to make me feel anything at all. Till now. The executive floor was quieter than the rest of the building. Thicker carpet. Taller ceilings. The kind of silence that isn't empty but pressurized. Filled with the weight of decisions that moved money and shaped futures. Her assistant, a composed young man named Oliver, walked me to a set of double doors and knocked once before opening them. The office was large and deliberately understated. Floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city. A desk that held only a laptop, a notebook, and a single glass of water. No awards on the walls. No framed magazine covers. None of the self-congratulatory decoration you find in offices built for appearance. Just clean lines, and the city stretched out beyond the glass like something she owned. Natasha Voss was standing at the window with her back to me when I walked in. She let me stand there for a moment. Not cruelly, I would later understand, but deliberately. She was a woman who believed that the first few seconds of a meeting told you everything important about the person you were meeting. Then she turned around. "Maya Callahan," she said. Not a question. A statement. The way someone says a name when they have already done their reading. "Yes," I said. "Thank you for seeing me." She looked at me for a moment with eyes that were dark and very direct. Then she walked to her desk, sat down, and gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit down," she said. "Tell me about the Hartley campaign." I sat. I told her. Not the polished version I would have given a client. The real version. The thinking behind the thinking. the interviews I had conducted, the insight about human uncertainty that had become the campaign's emotional spine. I spoke clearly and without apology, which surprised me slightly, because I had expected to be nervous in this room and I was not. She listened without interrupting. She didn't nod along the way people do when they want you to feel heard. She simply listened with the full weight of her attention, and the experience of being truly listened to was so unfamiliar that I almost lost my train of thought in the middle of it. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Why real clients?" she asked. That was a risk. They could have said no. They could have said the wrong things. "Yes," I said. "But real things are always a risk." And Hartley's problem wasn't their numbers. It was that nobody believed them anymore. You can't solve a trust problem with a polished message. You solve it with something true. She looked at me steadily. "And when you decided to go that direction," she said, "what did you feel?" I blinked. In 3 years of professional life, no one had ever asked me that question in a meeting. "What did you feel?" "Certain," I said after a moment. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely certain. Something shifted in her expression. It was subtle. A small, controlled thing, the way a light changes in a room when a cloud moves past the sun. Most people would have missed it. I did not miss it. "Good," she said quietly. And then she told me about the promotion. New title. New salary. Direct access to the agency's largest accounts. A seat at the table where the real decisions were made. She spoke about it matter-of-factly, without performance, the way she clearly spoke about most things, as though the decision had already been settled in her mind and the conversation was simply the formality of making it real. I sat across from her and listened and tried to look calmer than I felt, because underneath the professional stillness I was working very hard to maintain, something was happening that I did not yet have words for. Something that had nothing to do with the promotion, and everything to do with the way this woman looked at me, as though she could see not just what I had done, but who I was capable of becoming. No one had ever looked at me quite like that before. "Any questions?" she asked. I had approximately 40. I asked none of them. "No," I said. "Thank you." She nodded once and looked back at her laptop. A clean, clear dismissal that somehow did not feel dismissive at all. I stood. I walked to the door. I had my hand on the handle when her voice came from behind me, calm and unhurried. "Why, I turned. She was looking at me across the length of the office, and there was something in her expression that I would spend many nights afterward trying to name precisely. "Welcome to the table," she said. I took the elevator back down to my floor. I stood in it alone, watching the numbers descend, and I thought about a Tuesday morning not so long ago. A bathroom, a ring, a hum from the kitchen, and the terrifying, necessary decision to stop living a life that wasn't mine. I thought about how strange it was, the way one ending always contains the beginning of something you cannot yet see. The elevator doors opened. I walked back to my desk, sat down, and started working. But something had changed. Something quiet and significant and irreversible, the way the most important things always change. Not with a sound, but with a feeling. And for the second time in recent memory, I felt completely certain. Not at first. At first it just feels like warmth. Like standing near a fire on a cold night and thinking, "This is nice, this is good, I'll just stay here a little longer." And then a little longer becomes every evening. And every evening becomes the thing you look forward to most. And one day you turn around and realize the fire isn't beside you anymore. It's inside you. And by then, of course, it's far too late to pretend you aren't burning. The first Monday of my new role, I arrived at the executive floor at 8 in the morning and found that Natasha was already there. She was always already there. I would learn this about her gradually, the way you learn the habits of someone whose rhythms begin to matter to you, that she arrived before anyone else and left after everyone had gone, Not because she was performing dedication but because the work was genuinely where she felt most herself. The office after hours, she once told me, was the only place that felt completely honest. No performance. No politics. Just the problem and the thinking required to solve it. That first morning, Oliver showed me to a smaller office 2 doors down from hers, glass-walled, clean, with a view of the city that I was not yet accustomed to having. There was a notebook on the desk and a printed schedule for the week and a handwritten note in precise, angular handwriting that I immediately recognized as hers. It said, "Review the Mercer brief before 10. We'll talk then." No greeting. No welcome. Just work. I sat down and smiled to myself and opened the Mercer brief. Working with Natasha Voss was nothing like anything I had experienced before. She did not manage people the way most leaders managed people, with gentle guidance and careful affirmation and the soft padding of corporate language designed to make difficult feedback feel comfortable. Natasha did not believe in comfortable. She believed in clear. She would read your work and tell you exactly what was sharp and exactly what was weak in the same breath with the same even tone, and then she would ask you a question that made you realize the weakness she had identified was actually pointing towards something deeper. A gap in your thinking, an assumption you hadn't examined, a truth you had walked past without stopping. It was demanding in a way I had never experienced professionally. It was also, and I say this with complete honesty, the most alive I had ever felt in a conference room. Because here is what I understood about myself in those first weeks of working closely with her. I had been shrinking. Not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually and consistently over years, the way a river shrinks during a long dry season. In my previous role, I had learned to soften my ideas before presenting them. To offer opinions with enough qualification attached that if someone disagreed, I could retreat without embarrassment. I had become skilled at reading the room and adjusting accordingly, which sounds like emotional intelligence but is sometimes just a more sophisticated form of disappearing. Natasha did not allow disappearing. The first time I softened an opinion in a meeting with her, instinctively, automatically, the way I had trained myself to do, she stopped me mid-sentence. "Say it directly," she said. "Not unkindly. Just clearly." I blinked. I just meant that the campaign direction could potentially. "Why, yeah." She looked at me steadily. "You know what you think. Say what you think." The room was quiet. There were 2 other senior strategists in that meeting and I was aware of them watching. I took a breath. And then I said what I actually thought, plainly, without the qualifications, without the careful retreating language I had wrapped around it. I said it and I meant it and I did not apologize for meaning it. Natasha nodded slowly when I finished. "That's the idea," she said. "Build from there." I drove home that evening thinking about Derek. About how many times in 4 years I had softened something true because I wanted to keep the peace. About how I had called that love when it was actually erasure. Slow, comfortable, well-intentioned erasure. And I thought about how strange it was that a woman I had known professionally for less than a month had already demanded more of the real me than a relationship of 4 years ever had. I didn't know what to do with that thought yet. So I put it somewhere quiet inside myself and kept working. The dinners began in the 3rd week. Natasha called them working dinners, which they were in the beginning. A restaurant near the office, a bottle of sparkling water between us. The week's projects spread across the table in the form of talking points and open questions. She was efficient even in leisure. She did not believe in wasting an evening. But somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd dinner something shifted. We had finished discussing the Mercer account and moved on to a new client, a sustainable fashion brand called Alara. And I had just made a point about authenticity in brand storytelling when Natasha set down her glass and looked at me with that particular quality of attention that I was beginning to recognize as distinct from her professional focus. It was quieter, more personal. "You talk about authenticity as though you've paid for the understanding," she said. I looked at her. What do you mean? I mean, it doesn't sound theoretical when you say it. It sounds like something you learned the hard way. The restaurant hummed softly around us. Warm light. The low music of other people's conversations. I ended a 4-year engagement earlier this year, I said. I hadn't planned to say it. It arrived the way honest things sometimes do, without permission, fully formed. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look anything in particular. She simply listened the way she always listened, with that full and serious attention. He was a good man, I continued. Kind, dependable, everything that's supposed to matter. But I had spent 4 years building a life that looked right from the outside and felt like nothing from the inside. And one morning I just couldn't anymore. What made that morning different from all the others? She asked. I thought about it. Nothing really. That was the thing. Nothing was different. And I think that's what finally made it impossible to ignore. Because if nothing needed to change for me to feel this way, if the life was already as good as it was going to get, then the problem wasn't the life. The problem was that it wasn't mine. Natasha was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I left home at 18 with $40 and a portfolio of work I had made on a borrowed computer. My family thought I was destroying my future. I thought I was finally starting it. It was the first time she had offered me something personal. Unprompted, unguarded. Were you scared? I asked. Completely, she said simply. But fear and certainty can exist at the same time. Most people think they're opposites. They're not. The bravest decisions I have ever made were ones I was terrified of and certain about simultaneously. I looked at her across the table and felt something move in my chest. Quiet, significant, like the first tremor before something larger arrives. I looked away before it could show on my face. The dinners continued. Weekly, then occasionally twice a week. The work remained the framework, but it became increasingly thin as a disguise. We talked about our families, our cities, our early failures and the things those failures had taught us. She told me about the agency's near collapse in its 5th year. A client exodus that had left her with 3 employees, no runway, and a choice between reinvention and surrender. She had chosen reinvention. She always chose reinvention. I told her about the girl I had been in college. Loud, certain, full of opinions she hadn't yet learned to hide. About the years that had slowly worn that girl down. About how ending the engagement had felt like finding a door in a wall she had forgotten was there. She's still in there, Natasha said one evening, watching me across the table. That girl. I can see her. How? I asked. Because she appears every time you stop thinking about what you're supposed to say and just say the thing. I didn't respond. But I felt the words settle somewhere deep inside me, in a place I hadn't let anyone reach in a very long time. The annual Voss Creative Gala was held on a Friday evening in October at a venue in the West Loop. A restored industrial space transformed for the night into something warm and luminous. All amber light and long tables and the particular energy of a company celebrating itself. I wore a deep green dress that I had bought the day before without overthinking it. I arrived on my own, which felt significant in a way I didn't examine too closely. Natasha was already there when I arrived. She was standing near the far end of the room, speaking with the agency's board chairman, wearing a charcoal suit that was precise and quietly stunning. She saw me across the room almost immediately, or perhaps I only noticed her noticing me because I was already watching for it. She excused herself from the conversation and walked toward me with that unhurried, deliberate way she moved through every space, as though she had already decided exactly where she was going and the rest of the room simply needed to arrange itself accordingly. You look different, she said when she reached me. Different how? She considered this for a moment. Like yourself, she said. We moved through the evening the way we had learned to move through rooms together. separately and simultaneously, catching each other's eye across conversations, gravitating back together with the reliability of something that has found its own rhythm. Later in the evening, when the formal program had ended and the room had loosened into smaller conversations and the music had dropped to something slower and softer, we found ourselves standing near the tall windows that looked out over the street below. The city moved outside, headlights and pedestrians and the ordinary beautiful chaos of a Friday night in Chicago. I was watching the street when she spoke. Why, something in the way she said my name made me turn immediately. She was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not the focused intensity of the boardroom, not the composed warmth of our dinners, but something unguarded and serious and almost careful, as though she were holding something fragile and had decided, after a long time of holding it, to finally set it down. I need to tell you something, she said. And I need you to know that I've thought about it carefully. I don't say things I haven't thought about carefully. My heart was doing something I could not fully account for. I know, I said. I am falling in love with you, she said. Quietly. Plainly. The way she said everything that truly mattered. I wanted you to know that. Whatever you do with it. The room continued around us. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed at the far end of the space. The music played its slow song. And I stood there looking at Natasha Voss, this brilliant, difficult, extraordinary woman who had looked at me from the first moment and seen not what I was but what I was capable of. And I felt the truth of my own heart arrive with a completeness that left no room for argument. I'm not good at saying things I haven't earned the right to say, I told her. So I'm going to say this carefully. I paused. I think I'm already there. Something moved across her face. Relief perhaps. Or recognition. Okay, she said softly. Okay, I agreed. She called me on Sunday morning, 2 days after the gala. I spoke with the board, she said. And with the company's legal counsel. I'm removing myself from your direct supervisory chain. Effective immediately, you'll report to the managing director. Your accounts stay the same. Your role stays the same. Nothing changes professionally for you, except that no decision about your career will ever pass through me. I sat with my coffee in my Wicker Park apartment, the one my mother called temporary and I had long since decided was permanent, and I felt something open in my chest. You didn't have to do that so quickly, I said. Yes, she said. I did. Your career is yours, Maya. It was yours before I noticed you and it will be yours regardless of whatever this becomes. I will not allow any version of this story where someone can look at what you've built and wonder whether you built it yourself. I understood then completely why she had built a $40 million company. Not because she was the smartest person in the room, though she often was, but because she understood the difference between what was right and what was convenient. And she chose right even when it cost her something. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me, she said. Just keep doing work that makes the question irrelevant. I laughed. She made a sound that was almost a laugh in return. Claire Devo found me on a Wednesday. I was leaving a coffee shop on Michigan Avenue when a woman stepped into my path. Early 40s, sharp-faced, composed in the practiced way of someone who has rehearsed their composure until it fits like armor. You're Maya Callahan, she said. I'm Claire Devo. Natasha and I were together for 2 years. I knew the name. Natasha had mentioned her once, briefly, without elaboration, the way people mention things that still carry some weight. I know who you are, I said carefully. Claire looked at me with eyes that were not unkind but were very serious. I'm not here to make trouble, she said. I'm here because someone did this for me once and I wish they had done it sooner. She paused. Natasha is extraordinary. He's also consuming. She pulls people in completely and she means it, every bit of it. But she is also someone whose intensity eventually becomes the relationship's ceiling. I don't think she does it intentionally. I think she simply doesn't know how to love at half volume. I listened to every word Claire said. I gave it the weight it deserved, because it came from someone who had been where I was standing and had traveled further down the road. And then I thought about something Natasha had told me on only our second dinner together, when I had asked her what she regretted most professionally. She had said, "Every time I held back. Every time I thought that giving less of myself would make something easier. It never did. It just made it emptier." I thought about that. I thought about Derek and comfort and the ring that had come off easily. I thought about what I knew, not what I feared, not what someone else had experienced, but what I knew. "I appreciate you telling me," I said to Claire. And I meant it genuinely. I really do. But I've spent a long time letting other people's interpretations tell me what my experiences mean. I think I'm done with that. Claire looked at me for a long moment. Something in her expression shifted. Not quite approval, but perhaps recognition. "Fair enough," she said quietly. She nodded once and walked away. I stood on Michigan Avenue and let the October wind move around me, and I felt the clarity of a woman who knows her own mind and has decided to trust it. I called Natasha that evening. "Claire found me," I said when she answered. A pause. "I see." Her voice was careful. "She said you love at full volume," I told her. She meant it as a warning. "And I think full volume sounds exactly right," I said. "I've spent enough of my life at half." The pause that followed was different from the first one. Softer, fuller. "Maya," she said. And the way she said it, quietly with that particular weight she gave to things that truly mattered, made me feel seen in a way that I had spent 31 years not knowing I was missing. "I know," I said. "I want to tell you something before I finish. I want to tell you that this story is not really about Natasha, though she is extraordinary and I love her in ways I am still learning the language for. This story is about a Tuesday morning and a bathroom and a ring that came off easily. It is about the terrifying, necessary act of choosing yourself when everything around you is voting for the comfortable version of your life. It is about the strange and beautiful truth that the things we lose when we choose honestly, the safety, the approval, the known future, are always smaller than what we find on the other side of that choice. I was 31 years old when I realized the life I was living belonged to someone else entirely. I am 31 years old and I am sitting in a Wicker Park apartment with a cup of coffee and a view of a brick wall that I find, against all reason, completely beautiful. And for the first time, the life I am living is mine. There is a question that started all of this. Not Natasha. Not the promotion. Not the gala or the dinners or the moment everything changed between us. A question. Sitting on the edge of a bathtub on a Tuesday morning. Is this life actually mine? I answered it. And answering it cost me the comfortable version of my future. And gave me something I would not trade for anything in the world. The real one. I don't know where you are right now. Maybe you are exactly where you are supposed to be. And if you are, hold on to that with everything you have. Maybe you are sitting somewhere quiet, holding your own version of that ring, feeling a silence you have been trying very hard not to hear. If that is you, I want you to know something. The life that is actually yours is not gone. It is just waiting. Patiently. Quietly. On the other side of the honest choice you already know you need to make. I know because I made it. And it was the truest thing I have ever done. Because the most important stories are always just beginning.